Which leads me to what is maybe the most important question of our era and definitely the most important question of the 2024 election. How long until Donald Trump himself is held to account? Joining me now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and co-host of the indispensable MSNBC podcast, Prosecuting Donald Trump, and Katie Benner, reporter for the New York Times. Thank you both for being here tonight. Andrew, there is a lot of, well, hindsight's always 20/20, but you sort of foresaw how we might get into a problematic area, calendar-wise. Yep. At the beginning of this, right? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the way the Justice Department pursued the January 6 cases at sort of the inception of these investigations and how that was potentially problematic even back then.
So I think the big picture is that the judicial system and investigating and prosecuting and giving a defendant time to prepare the case that's part of due process, all of that is not built to deal with the problem that we are having now. It is a long-term sort of process, and we are dealing with a issue of trying to have accountability. And Judge Chutkan actually made a finding that you should have accountability in March. To be clear, she is not intentionally wanting to put this off. She is doing it because of these appeals. Exactly. So, going to to answer your question directly in terms of that's something that if you're in the Justice Department, you know that there is that time delay. And you're thinking, okay, if there are these crimes in January 6, which, by the way, we all witnessed, so this isn't something where you had to, yes, you have to look to build the case, but it's not like you are sitting there going, gee, I wonder if there was a crime committed.
Right.
And there obviously, I wouldn't say obviously, in my view, there was delay in terms of getting the case off the ground. And Jack Smith was dealt a tough hand in that he was given great facts. Both of his cases are incredibly strong, but, he had to sort of bring them very quickly because he was only appointed not that long ago. Yeah. So it's really not on his watch, but I do think part of the reason we're in this sort of looking at the clock so closely.
Every week counts, yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things you can do, just quickly doing the math, March 4th, that was the date that Judge Chutkan picked. We know where we are now. We know what the delay is of 5 weeks. So at the earliest, even if she was given a green light today, you have to sort of add in 5 weeks. So, it gets due sort of mid-April. And so that's certainly, before the election, but we just still don't have the decision. We don't know what they're going to rule. We don't know if the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on this. So that could be more delay. Final point before Katie talks is just remember the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, their case is scheduled for the end of March. They're willing to take a back seat to Jack Smith's case. But if this delay goes on, the one thing I will say is that case will go first. The Manhattan case, which was brought first, will actually be tried first because because the D.C. case, which obviously is a more important, a bigger case, but there may be enough time to do both.
Katie, and I will credit Nicole Wallace with banging this drum loudly, asking the question, why didn't the Justice Department begin this investigation with more alacrity as far as pursuing Donald Trump in terms of accountability and those in his inner circle? You have reporting about the notes of caution that were being sounded inside the Justice Department long after January 6 in terms of, pursuing Trump and the way in which there was concern about the department being seen as partisan. Certainly Trump aided in that by calling a lot of these investigations witch hunts. But can you talk about how that caution immediately after January 6 inside the Department of Justice may have actually led us to this moment here where we're literally, I mean, if you're a voter looking to try and make a decision about whether you want to choose a potentially convicted felon as your nominee, you're sweating out the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks when there's no conclusion to these trials.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. First, I think that whether or not you support or do not support Donald Trump, everybody should want a speedy trial, because if you're one of his supporters, you would want to see him exonerated in court just as much as you would want to see him found guilty in a court of law. I mean, I think that this should be something that no matter where people sit on the political spectrum, they should want to see resolved well before the election. Now, what Andrew was saying is really interesting, because I think if you actually look at the indictments and if you look at some of the reporting about the investigation before Jack Smith was appointed, there is not a lot in the election interference indictment that really feels like a new fact that was found necessarily after Jack Smith took over the investigation. A lot of these things were uncovered by the January 6th committee. We saw people coming in and out of the grand jury box before Jack Smith became the special counsel. And then we saw that indictment actually come to a head and a grand jury vote on that indictment really soon after Jack Smith became special counsel. So I think that it speaks to what Andrew was talking about in terms of there was some sort of delay happening, and we don't know all the details. Of course, because this is such an important and landmark case, there are going to be people reporting on this for years to come, no matter what happens in the case, to get every single one of those details about what was going on in the Justice Department. But in terms of the timeline, January 6th happened. Donald Trump was still in office, and that initial stage of the investigation happened in the last days of the Trump administration. It was a few weeks of basically all acting officials trying to put together an investigation as quickly as they could out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. And it would not be until March that Merrick Garland actually came in and took over that investigation. So you had a series of placeholder officials doing what they could to look at what happened on January 6th and who should be prosecuted. Now, to do something like move and immediately look at the former president would be a risky move. And if you know anything about the government, this is not something that an acting official is going to take on. You want your career appointees in there. You want your political appointees in there, not your career people. And we did not see political appointees take on the key roles in this case. U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., head of the National Security Division. For a while, it was really just Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco in there trying to figure out what to do. And it did move, I would say, slowly. If what you wanted was an investigation of Donald Trump, instead they really focused on the rioters. They focused on the people who were in the Capitol. Certainly, there's a lot of debate about whether or not it's the right thing to do. I've spoken with some national security officials and some people who look at domestic terrorism who point to those hundreds and hundreds of prosecutions as the reason why we're not seeing people do things like show up at court with Donald Trump and riot, why we're seeing relative calm, even though Donald Trump has certainly asked his supporters to come physically be there with him whenever he can. We're not really seeing that. And we're seeing, again, a relative calm. So I think there are pluses and minuses to that strategy, but certainly you didn't see a real look at Donald Trump until probably a year after January 6th. And again, to Andrew's point, if we had a legal system where you investigate, indict someone, and then go to court the next day, that's pretty fast, but that's not the system that we have. Even some of the decisions we're waiting for right now that feel like a long time, for example, the appeals court deciding whether or not Donald Trump is immune. That was about 2 weeks ago. It feels like forever. But in legal land, in our court system, 2 weeks is not very much time. So all of these things take a really long time. It was clear that the officials in the Justice Department, in their first several months, we're not thinking of the clock that way.
That is what I want to focus on, Andrew. You wrote an op-ed about this. They pursued a bottom-up strategy, and I think Katie rightly points out that may have prevented, masses of people acting on Donald Trump's suggestions that they riot or meet outside the courthouse or do whatever. But I'm not sure that the logic was entirely just kind of what's going to keep the peace. It was also some political considerations about how the department had become not weaponized, but the subject of a weaponization conversation driven largely by Donald Trump, right?
That could be that they were trying to protect the department from these calls of it being politicized. I'm going to crib from Chris Hayes when the January 6th federal indictment came out. And he said, in many ways, this is an indictment of the Justice Department, because the one thing that showed was that was not a bottom-up indictment. There was nothing about the bottom that this wasn't cooperators flipping and giving you the top. This was by looking at the top and seeing what was going on, because there was a disconnect between, and they never actually made the case between the sort of people inside the Capitol who were attacking. Yes, they were instigated, but they didn't really show, direct communications. So they could have made both. And this is one where it's not, to Katie's point, this isn't an either or. You can, of course, the cases against the January 6 rioters are righteous cases. The Proud Boys cases, the Oath Keepers, those are incredibly important, difficult, historic cases, and that there's nothing that should be taken away from the Justice Department. But this is a Justice Department that is very capable. They can do both. So I think it was the wrong strategy. I think we are owed a huge debt in this country to the January 6th committee, because it really said this is the way you have to look at it. And in many ways, they both shamed the Justice Department, because it's so unusual to have Congress ahead of the Justice Department. Having been at the Justice Department, that does not happen. And it also sort of gave permission. It sort of did both.
Well, the American public had sort of understood quite clearly what happened, at least televisually.
Exactly.
Feel any better? I have already put evac on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
Sir, come on, when is it not, please? Okay, couple of things. I'm running low on the dough. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah, I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I'll assume down we're going on to let us know.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Right, evac.
She's right in front.
We are facing a heavy, sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark aircraft. General! General! We need to evac immediately. Evac. Hold on. National security advisor. Stay down.